From the headquarters of Telesur English in Quito, Ecuador, I am Estefania Bravo. This is From the South. We start in Brazil, where a teenager has died after he was smothered and suffocated by a supermarket security guard in Rio de Janeiro. The incident was captured on camera. We warned viewers that the video you're about to see may be distressing to some. In the footage, the guard can be seen holding down the 19-year-old with the weight of his entire body. During the ordeal, the teen is said to have suffered positional asphyxia and was pronounced dead at hospital. A supermarket representative says the teen tried to steal the guard's weapon. A criminal investigation has been launched. The incident has incited widespread outrage and spurs comparison to the Eric Garner police killing in the U.S. And 8 employees from the mining company Vale have been detained in Brazil over the dam collapse that killed over 160 people. The arrests were made in the states of Rio de Janeiro, Sao Paulo, and Minas Gerais, as investigations continue to clarify who is responsible for the disaster. 5 others were arrested at the end of January, 2 of them engineers accused of attesting to the safety of the dam. Moving on to Haiti, where President Jovenel Moïse has made a call for dialogue after 8 days of violent protests that have left at least 7 dead. Moïse says he will try to reestablish peace and stability.
We are listening to the people, and a package of measures has been taken by the government. I asked the Prime Minister to come and explain them and apply them quickly to relieve our misery.
And capital Port-au-Prince has partially returned to normality after days of turmoil. Still, opposition parties are urging for the resignation of the president and say more demonstrations may be called. Our correspondent Pablo Perez has more.
This is the 9th day of rioting on the streets of Port-au-Prince, the capital of Haiti, and we can see still some isolated blockages with burning tires. The police is reporting quickly to those places because, well, this is as an answer to the president's message. He issued a message to the nation yesterday late at night on national television, where he condemned the violence and made a call to peace that the opposition considered was a mild answer to the questions they are asking about the legality of the handling of the country money, and also the high inflation and the rise on the prices of fuel that was sparkled the uncomfortable the anger of the people that have been rioting, but there is not such a big numbers of riders on the street right now. They are burning tires on different places of different sectors of the city, but we cannot see the masses that we saw on days past.
Thank you, Pablo, for your report. And now to Venezuela, where President Nicolás Maduro has said he hopes to reach a dialogue with the opposition to resolve the political situation in his country. Maduro made this statement while speaking at a ceremony commemorating 200 years of the Angostura Congress.
The U.S. empire has given the order not to have a dialogue, zero dialogue. That's a mistake. I said that before. The White House has meddled in Mr. Donald Trump, Mr. President.
Mr. President,
your advisors have put you in an alley without an exit. The coup has failed, and they won't be able to defeat Venezuela. So the only path is dialogue, understanding, respect.
The president also announced that the United Nations has agreed to help his government purchase medicine that the United States has been stopping them from acquiring.
We have permanent support agreements called Technical Humanitarian Assistance with the United Nations, and I have asked that they help us buy the medicine that the U.S. empire is blocking from us. And they said yes, they will help us.
And President Maduro has revealed in an interview with the Associated Press that his foreign minister, Jorge Arreaza, has met with the U.S. Special Envoy for Venezuela, Elliot Abrams.
I can tell you that we have had 2 meetings already with Mr. Elliot Abrams in New York. Our foreign minister has met twice with Elliot Abrams. The first meeting lasted 2 hours, the second 3 hours, a few days ago. I invited Elliot Abrams to come to Venezuela, in private, in public, in secret. Or if he wants to meet, let him say when, how, where, and I will be there.
During the interview, Maduro also criticized U.S. President Donald Trump's stance towards the country.
If Donald Trump decided tomorrow not to get involved in the affairs of Venezuela, Venezuela would shine. Venezuela would recover in an accelerated way. Venezuela would find solutions through political dialogue. But the infected hand of Donald Trump is hurting Venezuela. They have made up a crisis in the group of extremists that accompany Donald Trump. Imagine John Bolton, Elliot Abrams. The group of extremists that surround him has put him through a dead end, and it hurts Venezuela. I tell him from here, hands off of Venezuela, Donald Trump, and Venezuela will flourish, and we will get on track ourselves.
All this comes as the Trump administration imposes more sanctions on Venezuela, specifically targeting 5 officials, including the head of Venezuelan state oil company PDVSA. It's estimated that in 2018 alone, international sanctions cost Venezuela $20 billion. The Trump administration is reportedly planning to use military aircraft to send another shipment of so-called humanitarian aid to the Venezuelan border in Colombia. This comes as Russian Foreign Ministry warns that such aid can be used to further U.S. military goals.
The U.S. is using the guise of humanitarian convoy as a pretext for military force against the Maduro government, and the people of Venezuela are the unsuspecting victims of this plot.
The humanitarian convoy is nothing more than an excuse to stage foreign military intervention. All of this should be understood clearly, although it seems that the organizers may have miscalculated here. Still, this attempt at military intervention is a red line for all Latin America and the rest of the world.
Russian Foreign Minister spokesperson Maria Zakharova sounded the warning at a recent news conference. She adds that humanitarian aid must be made through the United Nations office in Caracas, and it must be in compliance with international rules. However, she says, the White House is plotting and using the convoy to provoke tensions in Venezuela.
All forms of psychological warfare and provocations are being used, from media manipulation to blackmail and hate. The main targets are the Republic. Venezuela's military forces are inclined to rise up.
Russia maintains that there is a need for dialogue between Venezuela's government and its opposition towards finding a solution to the ongoing political situation. Meanwhile, the United States continues to call for elections in a bid to weaken the legitimacy of the constitutional president Nicolás Maduro.
Humanitarian action. This is a lie in an attempt to divert attention from the fact that the U.S. resolution pact presented to the Security Council of the UN, they are trying to disguise military intervention with the delivery of humanitarian aid. This is a bid to stir tensions in Venezuela and justify full-on military intervention.
During a phone call this week, Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov warned U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo against any type of interference in the international affairs of Venezuela, including the use of force.
We'll be back very soon. Stay with us. Welcome back. On Saturday, Africa's most populous country, Nigeria, heads to the polls. Around 84 million voters will decide who the next president will be.
Candidates contesting the elections, but only 2 candidates have a real chance of winning. 76-year-old Muhammadu Buhari from the All Progressives Congress Party has campaigned on the promise that he'll take Nigeria to the next level. He also said votes would take place under a secure and peaceful atmosphere. He was elected as president in 2015 on the promise of fighting corruption and Boko Haram. But people say that he's failed to deliver on either promise. In the name of fighting corruption, he has been accused of mainly targeting the opposition. He was even nicknamed a slow Baba for his pace of work. In 2015, he took 6 months to appoint a cabinet. While in the 1980s, he headed the military junta, but now describes himself as a reformed democrat. His health problems have raised concerns. Many questions whether he is fit to rule. He has made frequent visits to the UK for treatment. On record, he has made several factual mistakes during his interviews and has been called confused and powerless by critics. 72 years old Atiku Abubakar from the People's Democratic Party has promised to bring power to people. He was a vice president between 1999 and 2007. Before coming to politics, he established himself as a successful business person. During his tenure, he won backing for former military heads of state. He is seen as an energetic politician who could deliver, but he has faced several high-profile corruption allegations, including bribery trial of a United States congressman in 2009. However, so far, he has not been convicted in any of the corruption cases.
Earlier, we spoke with Dirk Coetzee, professor of political science at the University of South Africa, about what this election means for Nigeria.
Well, the current president, Buhari, promised when he was elected to bring more security stability to the country. That didn't really, in the end, materialize so much. There's still instability in the country as a result of Boko Haram. The contender, the former Vice President Abubakar, we don't know so much because what will be his ability to bring more stability? He has been about 20 years ago. He was the vice president, so he hasn't been in a position of power or of authority of government lately, and therefore there's not a clear track record of his. So in the end, it's also going to depend very much on their program for economic development in the country, because that is the other very important issue during the election. Though there has been some defections from the governing party, I don't think we must interpret that as if this is an indication of the general mood amongst the voters in the country. We must remind ourselves there's 84 million voters, so it's a huge population that's going to vote in this weekend. And therefore, individual political movements by political leaders are not necessarily an indication of a change in the public opinion.
Rescuers in Zimbabwe are still searching for survivors after 2 unused gold mines flooded. The flooding happened Tuesday night near the town of Kadoma after a dam wall burst due to heavy rains. At least 23 people are feared dead. Authorities say the illegal miners entered the shafts at night to evade the owners. Rape and sexual violence against women and girls in South Sudan has continued to rise in high levels, according to the UN. This is despite the peace deal signed to finish the 5-year civil war in September 2018. According to a report by the United Nations, at least 134 women and girls were raped between September and December last year. 41 women also suffered other forms of sexual violence. The U.S. said most perpetrators were reportedly members of youth militia groups.
There's been very little accountability in South Sudan for what is a chronic, endemic problem of sexual violence against women and girls. Virtually complete impunity over the years. As a result, very little disincentive for these men to not do what they're doing. Rule of law has just not been applied. The authorities have made some efforts, the leaders have made statements that, this shouldn't happen and it's illegal and so on and so forth, but the message clearly is not getting down to the rank and file, and I think until people regularly appear in court and after a fair trial are jailed for significant sentences, this problem is going to continue.
South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa has denied allegations made by a former party official that he worked as an apartheid government spy in the 1970s. Ramaphosa is accused of making this deal to avoid a long prison sentence on the infamous Robben Island. Our correspondent Matuba Malachi has the details from Pretoria.
Veteran politician Patrick Musiwa Lekota told Parliament this week that President Cyril Ramaphosa was an apartheid-era spy. Now, Lekota is a former ANC MP and former Minister of Defense, among other portfolios that he held when he was a member of the ANC. He had since left the ANC in 2008 to form his own party. So now Lekota is in opposition to the ANC and uttered these words when the whole country was watching the debate of President Cyril Ramaphosa's State of the Nation address. Now, President Cyril Ramaphosa came out in defense of himself and his integrity, that he had not been a spy of the white supremacist apartheid government. But Musiwa Lekota insists that in 1974, when they detained with other comrades, President Cyril Ramaphosa saved himself from going to Robben Island for the longest time, like many other political icons that we know in this country, by ratting on his comrades. But President Cyril Ramaphosa came out in defense of himself, saying that he would never do that because he was committed to the battle and struggle against apartheid, and that's why he remains committed by serving the ANC that is still passionate about emancipating people in this country. And now President Cyril Ramaphosa cannot afford such a disastrous, I would call it a disastrous PR stunt by Mr. Lekota, because it's days before elections, and during elections everybody's competing for votes, and it's just under 2.5 months that we'll be going to elections in this country. So President Cyril Ramaphosa is on damage control mode now, trying to demystify the notion that he was even in cahoots with the apartheid government at any given moment. And President Cyril Ramaphosa has struggle credentials, even having been one of the people who authored the constitution of this country. And this would be a big PR disaster for him and his party going forward into elections in May this year. Back to you, studio.
Thank you, Matuba, for that report. Jamaica has relaunched its Below 300 road safety campaign aimed at keeping road fatalities below that mark. Over 300 road deaths have been recorded each year on the island since 2013. Many occurred as a result of drunk driving. As part of the campaign, a road safety video has been released. It's calling on motorists to be more cautious and less selfish on the nation's roadways and to see themselves in everyone.
It could be you. To learn how you can help.
The Caribbean Tourism Organization is expressing concern about the limited marketing of the Caribbean region to Latin America due to financial challenges. CTO Secretary General Hugh Riley says while he's optimistic about this year's tourism outlook, much more needs to be done to woo prospective visitors from non-traditional markets. He adds that if the Caribbean pools its resources, it would be a better option.
Tsunamis and other natural disasters.
Soca music may have originated in Trinidad and Tobago, but it has become the unifying sound that fuels carnivals across the wider Caribbean region. Michael Montano has embarked on a cultural collaboration project with Cuba through its artist Sima Funk. The Cuban singer makes music built on a fusion of Afro-Cuban rhythms with funk, blues, and reggae, which all have a shared history of slavery and resistance.
Our music, soca in particular, is based on unity. African and Indian come together. It have a Chinese element that came in, it have a Syrian element that came in, and it have a Dougla element. It is the greatest of all time for Caribbean music. It is the greatest of all time for island music, only because we are converging on each other organically.
We'll be back very soon. Stay with us. Welcome back. U.S. President Donald Trump has announced he will bypass Congress and declare a national emergency to get more money to build a border wall along the Mexican border.
It's a great thing to do because we have an invasion of drugs, invasion of gangs, invasion of people, and it's unacceptable.
House Speaker Nancy Pelosi and fellow Democrats have vowed to take legal and legislative action to stop Trump's emergency declaration. This comes after Democrats agreed to a deal that handed Trump $1.37 billion to build 55 miles of barriers instead of the $5.7 billion he asked for. Spain's Prime Minister Pedro Sánchez has called for a snap elections to be held on April 28th. The announcement comes just days after Sánchez's 2019 budget failed to pass in Parliament. The major defeat came after Catalan nationalists withdrew their support for the government's budget.
I inform you that with the power invested in me as President of the Spanish government, and after prior deliberation in the Council of Ministers, I have proposed the dissolution of Parliament and the calling of parliamentary elections for April 28th. Having a choice between two options, to do nothing and continue with a budget or call an election and give Spaniards the choice, I choose the second option. Spain has to continue moving forward. Progress must continue from the basis of tolerance and respect, with moderation and common sense, excluding inflammatory politics, growing and generating quality jobs.
And the Spanish Cultural Commission in Congress has passed a bill to push the government to honor Spanish colonizer Hernán Cortés. The initiative was proposed by the right-wing Citizens Party and calls to commemorate the 5th centennial of Cortés's arrival in Mexico, where he led the campaign that overthrew the Aztec Empire. Indigenous communities in the U.S. and the Spanish left wing have criticized the bill, arguing that it will honor someone for killing indigenous people. And now it's time to bring you more stories from around the world.
Members of the Chinese community in Spain rallied against the freezing of their bank accounts outside the BBVA offices in Madrid. The bank says the freezing of their accounts was lawful as it complied with the legal money laundering check and that it was carried out with no consideration of customers' nationality. It also said that customers were warned about the temporary freeze. However, protesters argue that the bank targeted Chinese customers and they received no notice.
The Spanish banks, led by BBVA, are blocking the accounts of the Chinese. They are under the bulletin law of capital, but most of those affected are workers. We don't have anything to depend on.
Hundreds of high school students skipped classes to demonstrate outside the French Environment Ministry for the Fridays for Future movement. The students were accompanied by police as they made their way to the ministry, where they called on the Environment Minister to take stronger action against climate change. The grassroots movement has taken off worldwide, with students holding rallies. Bahrain's Deputy Secretary-General of the Islamic National Accord Society has claimed that the government was given the green light to commit human rights abuses by US President Donald Trump against protesters. In an interview to mark the 8th anniversary of the revolution, Sheikh Hussein al-Dahi said around 5,000 political prisoners are being detained, adding that, quote, life sentences and executions of prisoners have become a sip of water and some prisoners may be deported from Bahrain after their release. The country has seen a series of popular uprisings against the monarchical government since 2011.
Brazilian actor Wagner Moura has presented his first film as a director at the Berlin International Film Festival. Called Marighella, the movie tells the story of Marxist militant leader Carlos Marighella. He was one of the most important figures behind the fight against the military dictatorship that ruled Brazil during the 60s. The film will be released at a time when the current Brazilian president has praised the military dictatorship, pushed for a bill to expand guns' rights, and has openly promoted the persecution of left-wing leaders. Carlos Marighella was killed in an ambush by state forces in 1969.
We started this project in 2013. We shot the film under Temer, right after the coup d'etat that ousted Dilma Rousseff in 2016.
And the film is going to be released this year under Mr. Jair Bolsonaro's presidency. So, of course, the film is not a response to any specific government. This film, I would like to think that our film is bigger than Bolsonaro. It's not a response to him, but it's obviously this is a film that, and it's probably one of the first cultural products of the Brazilian art environment that's obviously in contrast to the group that seized power in Brazil.
And with that, we've come to the end of this news brief. These and other stories, as always, find them on our website at telesurenglish.net. And also join us on social media. We are on Facebook, on Twitter, and on Instagram. For Telesur English, I am Estefania Bravo. Thank you for watching.